I remember the first time I laid eyes on the Thunderbolt. It was spring of 1943, and I was stationed at a small airfield just outside of Norwich, England. The RAF had been buzzing about this new American fighter arriving soon, and from what I'd heard, it was a beast, a lumbering giant compared to the sleek Spitfires I was used to. When the P-47 rolled onto the tarmac, I couldn't help but laugh. It looked like someone had taken a milk jug, slapped some wings on it, and called it a fighter. The guys back at the mess hall were calling it the Jug, and I thought it was just a joke. I mean, really, who needs a flying milk bottle when you've got nimble little birds like the Spitfire or the Hurricane? The pilot assigned to the Thunderbolt that day was a young American named Jack Harris. He was tall and lean, with a cocky grin that made me think he was either crazy or just really confident in that bulky aircraft. Jack was wearing that classic leather flight jacket, the kind that looked like it had seen a dozen dogfights already, and his helmet was adorned with stickers from every base he'd been to. There was something about him. Maybe it was the way he swaggered or the way his flight boots gleamed even on a muddy airfield, that made me pay attention. But the first time Jack took that jug up, the whole squadron was ready to mock him. "Watch out, lads, here comes the flying sofa," someone shouted. The plane lumbered down the runway, took an eternity to get airborne, and when it finally did, it climbed like it was dragging a sack of potatoes behind it. We all expected it to be an easy target for the Luftwaffe. That first mission was a disaster. Radios went dead, communications were a mess, and the Thunderbolt's sluggishness was painfully obvious. By the end of it, we'd lost more planes than we'd shot down, and the Germans were still laughing at the Jug. "It's a joke," they said. "An American milk bottle won't last a day in the sky." But here's the thing about jokes, they can be deadly. Because buried inside that bulky frame was something the Germans didn't expect. Raw power, and a heart as tough as steel. Jack told me later, "You don't judge a book by its cover, or a plane by its shape." And he was right. That day, the Thunderbolt was the underdog, the awkward kid nobody wanted to pick for their team. But it was about to rewrite the rules of the air war. As I watched Jack taxi back after that rough sortie, his grin was gone, replaced by a fire in his eyes. The real fight was just beginning, and somehow, I knew that Jug was going to surprise us all. Little did we realize then, the skies above Europe were about to host a clash that would turn the war upside down. But what no one knew at the time was that the Thunderbolt's true weapon wasn't its speed or agility. It was something far more terrifying, and it was waiting for the right pilot to unleash it. And that pilot, I suspected, was Jack Harris. The skies were about to get a whole lot darker. The morning sun spilled over the sleepy town of Durham as I prepared for what I thought would be another routine patrol. Jack was already at the briefing tent, pacing like a caged lion. His leather jacket was creased from countless missions, and his flight gloves dangled from his fingers as if they couldn't wait to get back on the controls. He caught my eye and gave me that crooked smile, the one that said, "Trust me, this bird's about to roar." The squadron gathered around, waiting for the briefing from our commander, a grizzled veteran named Colonel Mitchell. He was the kind of man who'd seen more war than any of us wanted to admit. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes carried the weight of every life lost under his command. "Listen up," he said, voice low but sharp. "The Luftwaffe's been picking us apart for weeks. They laugh at our new toys, but that's about to change. Today, we're going to show them what happens when you underestimate a Jug." I glanced at Jack, whose fingers drummed on the table like a jazz drummer waiting for the beat to drop. The plan was straightforward. Climb high above enemy territory, spot the enemy, then dive like a meteor and blast them before they even knew what hit them. Boom and zoom, they called it. Simple enough, but it took guts to trust a plane that felt like piloting a brick. We took to the skies, the roar of the Thunderbolt's engine drowning out the chatter over the radio. Jack's plane looked almost comical from the ground, a bulky silhouette against the bright blue. But up close, it was a fortress. His cockpit was roomy, the glass canopy gleaming like a jewel, giving him a panoramic view that the nimble but cramped German fighters could only dream of. As we climbed higher, the air thinned, and the temperature dropped. The cold bit through my flight suit, but Jack's face stayed calm, focused. We reached 30,000 feet, and suddenly, the whole world seemed to stretch out beneath us. patchwork fields, winding rivers, and the distant hum of war. Then, out of nowhere, a squadron of Messerschmitts appeared, sleek and deadly, slicing through the air like sharks. The Germans dove toward us, confident, cocky. They thought they had the upper hand. Jack's voice crackled over the radio, steady and calm. "Here we go, lads. Time to make the jug sing." He tipped the nose of his plane down, and the jug transformed. Gravity tugged the 8-ton beast, accelerating it faster than any of us expected, past 500 miles per hour. The Thunderbolt was no longer a clumsy giant. It was a guided missile. The Messerschmitt scrambled, but Jack was already lining up his sights. The 50 caliber machine guns tore a wall of lead through the sky, tracers streaking like deadly lightning. One by one, the enemy planes exploded into fireballs or spiraled out of control, victims of the jug's brutal firepower. I watched in awe as Jack pulled away, his plane climbing back to altitude with a roar that shook the clouds. The Germans, stunned and battered, retreated. Back on the radio, Jack's voice was barely above a whisper, but filled with triumph. "They laughed at the jug. Now they're eating dust." For the first time, I saw the Thunderbolt not as a joke, but as a weapon forged for the brutal realities of this war. The size, its power, it wasn't a flaw. It was a promise. A promise that the skies belonged to no one, and that sometimes the slowest jug could outpace the fastest fighter. But as we headed home, a new unease settled in my gut. The Germans weren't just going to roll over. They'd adapt, they'd learn. And the next time we met, the stakes would be higher. Jack looked over at me, eyes gleaming under his helmet. "This is only the beginning. Wait till you see what the jug can really do." I had no idea then just how right he was, or how dark the skies would grow before this war was done. The next morning, the airfield buzzed with a tense energy. The usual chatter was replaced by focused silence, broken only by the steady hum of engines warming up. Jack was already suited up, his flight suit hugging his lean frame, boots polished to a mirror shine despite the mud that clung stubbornly to the hangar floor. His helmet gleamed under the pale light, and the newly fitted bubble canopy on his Thunderbolt caught every ray, casting a halo around the cockpit like it was a cathedral of war. The bubble canopy was a game-changer. Gone was the razorback design that had turned the rear blind spot into a death trap. Now, Jack had a nearly unobstructed view all around. A 360-degree panorama that made the skies less of a mystery and more of a chessboard waiting to be dominated. I couldn't help but admire how the sleek curves of the canopy gave the jug a touch of elegance, almost seductive in contrast to its bulky frame. As Jack climbed into the cockpit, his fingers expertly moved over the controls, checking gauges and toggling switches with a dancer's grace. There was a rhythm to it, a silent promise that this machine was more than just metal and firepower. It was an extension of the pilot himself. We took off into the cold morning sky, the propeller's paddle blades cutting through the air with newfound efficiency. The wider blades, engineered to bite deeper into the atmosphere, gave the Thunderbolt a much-needed boost in acceleration and climb rate. No longer was it the lumbering beast we'd first laughed at. Now it climbed alongside the German fighters, matching their nimble moves with surprising agility. Up at 28,000 feet, the air grew thin and chilly, but the Thunderbolt's secret weapon, the turbo supercharger, was humming along like a well-oiled machine. While the German Bf-109s gasped for breath, their engines choking in the thin air, Jack's engine was just hitting its stride, roaring with over 2,800 horsepower thanks to water injection. It was like watching a heavyweight boxer dance circles around a lightweight. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high." Jack's voice was calm but sharp. We scanned the sky, and there they were, Messerschmitts diving in, confident as ever. Jack's eyes narrowed as he tipped the nose of the jug over the edge and pointed it straight at the enemy. The dive was brutal, the plane shook, the wind screaming past the canopy. But the Thunderbolt held steady, its massive frame slicing through the clouds like a hot knife through butter. In those critical seconds, Jack unleashed the jug's wrath. The 8.50 caliber machine guns erupted in a thunderous roar, spitting out a hailstorm of lead that turned one enemy fighter into a blazing inferno. The sheer volume of fire was terrifying. It wasn't about precision. It was about overwhelming force, turning the sky into a deadly hailstorm where survival was a miracle. One German pilot tried to break away, banking sharply, but the Thunderbolt's speed in the dive was unmatched. Jack followed, climbing back up with a grin you could hear through the radio. "Try to catch me now." As we regrouped, I caught a glimpse of Jack's face through the canopy. Sweat glistening on his brow, eyes blazing with adrenaline. Yet there was a calm confidence there that told me he trusted this jug like a loyal dog. Back on the ground, we debriefed, the mood lighter, the laughter returning but edged with respect. The jug wasn't just a joke anymore, it was a force to be reckoned with. But as the day wore on, whispers started circulating about a new German tactic. Rumors of specialized flak batteries and fighters equipped with radar-guided guns. The war was evolving, and so would the Thunderbolt have to. Jack caught my eye as we shared a smoke near the hangar. "They think they've seen everything, but they haven't met the real jug yet," he said, flicking the cigarette away. "This is just Act 1. I nodded, heart pounding. The skies were getting darker, the game more dangerous. And somewhere in the distance, a shadow was waiting. One that might just change everything. The dawn broke gray and heavy over the village of Snettisham. The kind of morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. The airfield was shrouded in mist, dew clinging to the wings of the Thunderbolts parked in neat rows like soldiers waiting for orders. Jack was already striding toward his plane. His flight suit zipped up tight against the chill, the familiar weight of his helmet under one arm. His boots clacked purposefully on the concrete, each step a promise that today would be different. What made Jack stand out wasn't just his skill. It was the way he seemed to understand the jug's soul. While others grumbled about its size or sluggishness, Jack embraced it, treating the plane less like a machine and more like a partner in crime. Today, he was wearing a thin, olive-green scarf that fluttered in the breeze, a small rebellion against the gray monotony of military issue. It framed his sharp jawline and dark eyes, which glinted with a mix of determination and mischief. As he climbed into the cockpit, I noticed the subtle changes to the plane. The armor plating around the cockpit had been thickened, a veritable bathtub of steel to protect him from the deadly streams of cannon fire that had become the Luftwaffe's signature. The bubble canopy gleamed like a polished gem, promising clear sightlines even when the sky was a chaotic mess of tracers and smoke. The brief was terse. Intelligence had reported a new formation of enemy fighters spotted near the coast, moving with an unusual level of coordination. Rumors of a new ace leading them had everyone on edge. We called it the Wolf Pack, and their reputation was as fierce as a pack of hunting dogs. Jack's grin was tight but confident. "Sounds like a party," he muttered as the engines thundered to life, their 2,800's deep growl vibrating through the air like a heartbeat. Takeoff was smoother than usual, the new paddle blade propeller slicing through the air with a sharp efficiency that shaved precious seconds off our climb. We rose through the clouds, the world below turning into a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, dotted with rivers shimmering like silver ribbons. At 25,000 feet, the radio crackled with tension. "Wolfpack spotted 12 miles north. They're coming fast." Jack's fingers danced over the controls, adjusting throttle and trim. His voice was steady, but I caught the edge of steel beneath the calm. "All right, lads. Time to show them why you don't mess with the jug." The enemy appeared like ghosts through the mist, sleek, black silhouettes cutting through the sky with lethal grace. Their leader, a tall German pilot known as Dieter Shadowkraus, was a legend. A man as cold and precise as the knives he metaphorically threw in the air. The battle erupted in a flash. Tracers streaked across the sky, turning the clouds into a deadly fireworks display. The jug's guns barked like a rabid beast, unleashing torrents of lead that chewed through wings and engines. Jack's piloting was poetry. He weaved the heavy plane with surprising finesse, diving and climbing, baiting the wolves one by one into his trap. One enemy fighter broke formation and charged straight at Jack, guns blazing. The impact was brutal. The jug shuddered as rounds tore through its wing, but Jack held steady, eyes locked on his target. With a sharp twist of the stick, He delivered a burst that sent the aggressor spiraling earthward in a ball of flame. As the last of the wolf pack peeled away, beaten and broken, Jack's voice came over the radio, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Jug's still standing. And so am I." Back on the ground, as mechanics rushed to patch the bullet holes, Jack climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit smeared with grease and sweat, but his smile unbroken. The Jug might have been wounded, but it was far from defeated. And neither was he. But beneath the celebration lurked a darker truth. Intelligence had intercepted a coded message hinting at a new weapon, a secret that could turn the Thunderbolt strengths into weaknesses. Jack's eyes darkened as he listened, the weight of what was coming settling like a stone in his gut. That night, as the airfield lay quiet under a blanket of stars, Jack stood alone by his plane, running a hand along its battered fuselage. "You and me, old girl," he whispered. "We're going to have to fight smarter, because the next battle, it's not just about firepower. It's about survival." And somewhere beyond the horizon, the shadow of that new threat was already creeping closer. The sun was dipping low over the rolling hills of Cambridgeshire when the alarm blared across the airfield. Twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. But there was no time to admire the sunset. Jack was already racing toward the Thunderbolt, his flight suit dusted with grime from the last sortie, helmet swinging from his hand as if it were a trophy. His eyes burned with that familiar fire, equal parts determination and a hint of reckless daring. Tonight's mission was different. Intelligence had picked up unsettling chatter about a new German anti-aircraft weapon, something that could track and target planes with unnerving precision. The brass called it the Widow's Eye, and from what we'd heard, it wasn't just rumor. Reports spoke of entire flights being shredded before they could even reach bombing altitude. The thought sent a cold chill down my spine, but Jack looked unfazed. If anything, he seemed eager. The briefing tent was crowded, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the noise. "This new threat means we can't play by the old rules. The Widow's Eye hunts from the ground, but it's smart, fast, and deadly. Your job: get in, hit the target, and get out before it locks on." Jack smirked, the kind of grin that made you think he was about to crack a joke. "Sounds like my kind of dance." Suiting up, he pulled on a pair of leather gloves with worn fingertips and strapped on a wristwatch that had seen better days but never missed a beat. His boots, scuffed and dust-streaked, thudded as he climbed into the cockpit. The bubble canopy hissed shut, sealing him inside his armored sanctuary. As we roared down the runway, the Thunderbolt's engine thundered like a beast awakened, its paddle-blade propeller slicing the air with a ferocity that matched our nerves. The climb was swift, the plane responding to Jack's every command with surprising agility. Proof that the upgrades were paying off. We approached the target area under a cloak of fading light. The countryside below was a patchwork of shadows and flickering campfires, and somewhere in that darkness lurked the Widow's Eye. Jack's eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and unyielding. Suddenly, the sky erupted. Flak bursts blossomed like deadly chrysanthemums, tracer rounds streaking past in a deadly dance. The Widow's Eye was tracking us, and it wasn't hesitating to open fire. Jack's voice came over the radio, steady but urgent. "Hold tight, lads. This is where the Jug earns its keep." He pushed the throttle forward, the Thunderbolt plunging into a steep dive. The massive plane shook violently as rounds pinged off its armored shell, but the radial engine chugged on, unfazed. The turbo supercharger roared to life, pushing the beast faster than I thought possible, hurtling us out of the flak zone like a bullet from a rifle. Near the target, a heavily fortified railway junction, Jack leveled out, unleashing a salvo of rockets and bombs that tore through the enemy's defenses. The explosions lit up the dusk like fireworks, sending plumes of smoke and debris spiraling skyward. But the Widow's Eye wasn't done. As we turned for home, the ground radar locked onto us again, and a new wave of flak rained down like hellfire. The Thunderbolt shuddered as a shell exploded perilously close, shards peppering the fuselage. Jack's hands were steady on the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're tougher than you look, old girl," he muttered, dodging and weaving through the deadly hail. The dive back was a blur of speed and noise, the airframe creaking under the strain. We punched through the clouds, the familiar patchwork of fields welcoming us home. Touching down, Jack climbed out, his flight suit torn and stained, lips cracked but smiling fiercely. "The widow's eye may be clever," he said, lighting a cigarette with a shaky hand. "But it doesn't know who it's messing with." Mechanics swarmed the plane, inspecting the battle scars, bullet holes peppered across the wings, a dented tail fin, and a canopy scratched but intact. The Jug had taken a beating but refused to fall. That night, as the airfield quieted and the smoke from campfires drifted upward, I caught Jack staring at the stars, his face shadowed but resolute. "They're coming harder, faster," he said softly. "But so are we." And somewhere deep in the heart of the Reich, the widow's eye was already recalibrating, preparing for its next deadly dance. The early morning fog clung stubbornly to the fields around Lakenheath, wrapping the airfield in a damp, ghostly shroud. The usual hum of activity was muted, replaced by the low murmur of pilots prepping for what was rumored to be the toughest mission yet. Jack stood near his Thunderbolt, the faint light catching the gleam of the polished bubble canopy and the sleek curve of the new paddle blade propeller. His flight suit hung snug, zipped up to the throat, and his leather gloves were laced tight, fingers twitching with anticipation. Around his neck, the olive-green scarf fluttered faintly in the cold breeze, a small signature of defiance against the coming storm. Today, the orders were clear: escort a squadron of B-17 bombers on a deep penetration mission into the heart of Germany. The target was a massive industrial complex near Essen, a fortress guarded by layers of flak batteries and the ever-present threat of Luftwaffe interceptors. The stakes were high, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The briefing was grim. Colonel Mitchell's voice was steady but grim as he laid out the plan. "The Germans have beefed up defenses. They know we're coming. You'll escort the bombers, keep their skies clear, and watch each other's backs. Expect heavy resistance, don't get caught in a turning fight. Boom and zoom is the only way." Jack cracked a half-smile. "Sounds like a party," he muttered, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath his words. As we taxied to the runway, the Thunderbolt's powerful radial engine growled, a beast eager to be unleashed. Jack's hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, adjusting instruments and checking gauges. His eyes, sharp and focused, flicked to the bubble canopy's edge, where a small scratch caught the light, a souvenir from the last skirmish. The takeoff was smooth, the paddle blade propeller slicing through the morning air with precise efficiency. We climbed in tight formation, the B-17s lumbering ahead like massive silver whales, their engines droning a steady rhythm. At 25,000 feet, the sky suddenly erupted. Jagged bursts of flak blossomed around us, turning the heavens into a deadly storm. The widow's eye was still hunting. Jack's voice cut through the radio static. "Stay sharp. Keep your eyes peeled." Out of the clouds, Messerschmitts dove like hawks, their sleek black frames cutting through the gray. The Luftwaffe was relentless, but the Thunderbolt pilots were ready. Jack's Jug surged forward, diving into the fray with the fury of a cornered lion. He weaved through tracer fire, his plane shaking under the assault, but the armored cockpit and radial engine absorbed the punishment. His 8.50 caliber machine guns spat death, carving a path through the enemy formation. One by one, the German fighters faltered, trailing smoke or spiraling out of control. Amid the chaos, Jack spotted a Bf-109 locking onto a bomber. With a roar, he surged forward, a Thunderbolt unleashed. The German pilot didn't stand a chance. Jack's guns tore through the fighter's wing, sending it tumbling earthward. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but the Thunderbolts held firm. When the last enemy was driven off, the bombers released their deadly cargo, explosions rippling across the industrial complex below. As we turned for home, the sky was eerily quiet, the tension replaced by exhaustion and a hard-won sense of victory. Touching down, Jack climbed out, his face smeared with sweat and soot, but his grin was wide and genuine. "That's how you jug," he said, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted into the fading light. But beneath the relief, a shadow lingered. Reports had come in, Dieter Shadow Kraus was still out there, rebuilding his pack, and he wasn't finished yet. Jack's eyes met mine, dark and resolute. This war's far from over, and I have a feeling the next dance will be the deadliest yet. The cold steel chill of dawn settled over the quiet village of Wittering as I made my way to the briefing tent. The air was crisp, the kind that sneaks under your flight jacket and reminds you how fragile life really is up here. Jack was already there, leaning casually against his Thunderbolt, which gleamed like a silver bullet beneath the rising sun. His flight suit was a perfect fit, worn just enough to show it had seen its share of battles, and his boots, scuffed but sturdy, tapped out a restless rhythm on the tarmac. Today wasn't just another escort mission. Intelligence had confirmed that Dieter Shadow Kraus, the Luftwaffe ace who'd haunted our skies, was orchestrating a massive strike against one of our forward airfields. The plan was to intercept and stop them before they could unleash hell on our ground forces. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but Jack's grin was as sharp as ever, as if challenges were invitations to dance. Inside the tent, Colonel Mitchell laid out the mission with a calm urgency. Kraus and his pack are aggressive and cunning. They'll try to draw us into close dogfights. Remember, no turning battles. Boom and zoom only. Jack gave me a sideways glance, a mischievous spark lighting his dark eyes. Let's give them a show they won't forget. We climbed into the sky, engines roaring like thunder beneath the wings. The Thunderbolt's powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine hummed with raw strength, and the turbo supercharger sang a high-pitched note as we reached cruising altitude. Jack's bubble canopy shimmered against the cloudless blue, giving him a near-perfect view of the battlefield ahead. Then, through the haze, the enemy appeared, sleek Messerschmitts slicing through the air with lethal precision. Kraus led the pack, a shadow among shadows, his black plane cutting a menacing silhouette against the sun. The battle erupted instantly. Tracer rounds streaked like deadly lightning, and the roar of machine guns filled the sky. Jack's Thunderbolt dove with brutal speed, his 8.50 caliber machine guns unleashing a torrent of lead that shredded wings and tore through fuselages. The roar of the Jug was deafening, a beast unleashed in the heart of the storm. One of Kraus's wingmen broke formation, aiming straight for Jack. The airframe groaned as bullets pinged off, but Jack held steady, twisting the Jug with surprising agility. With a sharp burst, he sent the attacker spiraling down in flames. Kraus wasn't done. He circled back, eyes locked on Jack, the tension between them electric. The two planes danced a deadly ballet. Turns, dives, and climbs that tested every ounce of skill and nerve. Jack's voice crackled over the radio, calm but resolute. "You want to dance, Kraus? Let's dance." The Jug surged forward, diving into a devastating attack. Tracers tore through Kraus's cockpit, and his plane shuddered under the assault. Smoke billowed, and with a final roar, he broke off, retreating into the clouds. As the battle waned, the skies cleared, leaving us breathless and battered but victorious. Back on the ground, Jack climbed out, his flight suit torn but his spirit unbroken. The Jug bore fresh scars, bullet holes peppered across its wings and fuselage, but it still stood proud. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack lit a cigarette, his eyes distant. "Kraus is dangerous," he said quietly, "but so are we. The Jug isn't just a plane. It's a promise, and I intend to keep it." Yet, beneath that promise lurked a question none of us dared voice. What price would we pay in the battles to come? Because the war was changing, and the shadows were growing longer. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp earth as dawn broke over the airfield near Framlingham. Mist curled around the parked planes like ghostly fingers, and the faint rumble of engines warming up stirred the morning calm. Jack stood beside his Thunderbolt, the morning light catching the sheen of its freshly polished fuselage. His flight suit was snug, the leather gloves laced tightly, and that ever-present olive scarf fluttered lightly in the cool breeze. His helmet sat on the wing, gleaming like a silent sentinel awaiting its master. The briefing was terse. A new directive had come down. The Thunderbolts were to transition from pure escort duties to ground attack roles. The Jug's powerful engine could carry an impressive payload, up to 2,500 pounds of bombs and a battery of high-velocity rockets. The plan was to cripple German supply lines, railroads, and troop convoys ahead of the D-Day invasion. Jack's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and gravity. "Time to bring the Jug down to earth," he said with a grin. "Let's make some noise." We took off in tight formation, engines roaring as we cut through the low clouds. The countryside below was a patchwork of fields and forests, soon to become a battlefield. Flying low was dangerous, anti-aircraft fire was relentless, and the risk of being hit was high. But the Thunderbolt was built for this kind of punishment. Its air-cooled radial engine and armored cockpit were a fortress in the sky. As we approached the first target, a German supply train snaking through a narrow valley, the sky erupted in flak bursts. The widows I was still hunting, but Jack was undeterred. He leveled the Jug, releasing a salvo of rockets that tore into the train, sending cars tumbling like dominoes. The roar of explosions echoed through the valley as bombs rained down on supply depots and rail yards. Jack's plane shook under the fire of small arms and flak, but he held steady, weaving through the deadly hail with a pilot's grace. His guns barked, shredding trucks and armored vehicles lining the roads. The sensation was intoxicating. The Jug transformed into a weapon of pure destruction, a flying artillery piece raining hell from above. But the danger was real. On the return leg, a burst of flak tore through Jack's left wing. Alarms blared in the cockpit, and smoke curled from the engine cowling. Yet the Jug refused to die. With steady hands and nerves of steel, Jack coaxed the wounded beast home, landing with a lurch but intact. As ground crews swarmed the plane, Jack climbed out, sweat mingling with grime on his face, but his smile was unbroken. "She's a tough old girl," he said, patting the battered fuselage. "And she's just getting started." That night, as the airfield settled into uneasy silence, Jack stared at the stars, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down. The Jug had found a new purpose, one that would make it the nightmare of German soldiers and a symbol of relentless Allied firepower. But somewhere in the shadows, the enemy was watching, waiting to strike back. And the next battle promised to test the Jug and its pilot like never before. The sky over the Normandy coast was a steel-gray canvas streaked with wisps of cloud as dawn broke on D-Day itself. The airfield at Bentwaters was a hive of controlled chaos. Pilots shouting last-minute orders, mechanics rushing between planes, the steady drone of engines warming up blending with the distant thunder of naval bombardments. Jack stood by his Thunderbolt, the morning light glinting off its battle-scarred fuselage. His flight suit bore the dirt and sweat of countless missions, and his leather gloves were worn but reliable. That olive-green scarf fluttered lightly in the chilly breeze, a small defiant banner amidst the storm. Today, the Jug's role had shifted once more. No longer just a high-altitude hunter or escort, it had become the spearhead of the Allied ground attack. Jack's mission was clear: provide close air support for the troops hitting the beaches, obliterating enemy positions, tanks, and artillery before they could wreak havoc on the invading forces. The briefing was terse but urgent. Expect heavy anti-aircraft fire and desperate resistance. Fly low, hit hard, and get out fast. The fate of the invasion depends on you. Jack's eyes sparkled with grim determination. "Time to make some noise," he muttered, clapping a hand on the Jug's fuselage as if sharing a final moment of trust. We took off amid the roar of engines, flying low over the channel, the salty spray misting the canopy. The ground below was a patchwork of chaos. Explosions, smoke plumes, and the scattered movements of men and machines. The Jug, loaded with bombs and rockets, felt alive beneath Jack's hands, a beast ready to unleash fury. As we approached the beaches, flak erupted like deadly fireworks, tracer rounds streaking through the sky. Jack's plane shook under the hail, but the armored cockpit and rugged radial engine absorbed the punishment. He dove into the fray, releasing rockets that tore through German tanks, their metal hulks exploding in fiery blossoms. His guns roared, shredding enemy machine gun nests and artillery positions, turning the beach defenses into smoking ruins. The roar of the Jug was a beacon of hope for the soldiers below and a nightmare for the defenders. But the danger was immense. Jack's plane took hits, shattered canopy glass, scorched wings, and trailing smoke, but he pressed on, refusing to falter. The Jug's legendary toughness was on full display, each bullet and shell absorbed like a badge of honor. As the sun climbed higher, the tide of battle slowly turned. The Allies gained ground, and Jack's squadron provided relentless cover, their thunderous assault tipping the scales. Touching down later, Jack climbed from the cockpit, face streaked with grime, eyes bright but weary. "She's a fighter," he said softly, running a hand over the battered fuselage. "And so are we." That evening, beneath a sky heavy with stars and the distant echoes of war, Jack lit a cigarette, the smoke curling upward like a silent prayer. "The Jug's come a long way," he murmured. "But the war isn't over, and neither are the battles to come." Unseen by us, far to the east, a shadow moved, a whisper of something darker and more deadly lurking in the fading light. The Jug had survived, but the next challenge would test its mettle, and ours like never before. The chill of early spring settled over the quiet airfield at Fairford, the once bustling hub now tinged with a restless calm. Jack stood alone beside his Thunderbolt, the plane's worn fuselage etched with scars from countless battles, a testament to a war fought in fire and steel. His flight suit was faded, the leather gloves frayed at the edges, and the olive-green scarf fluttered weakly in the cold breeze, a silent echo of battles past. The war in Europe was winding down, but the skies remained perilous. Rumors whispered of a final, desperate push by the enemy. New weapons, new tactics, and shadows moving where none should be. The Jug, once mocked as a clumsy flying milk bottle, had become a legend, its roar a symbol of relentless strength and survival. Jack ran a hand along the cockpit rim, fingers tracing the dents and bullet holes that told stories of near misses and miraculous escapes. "You've been through hell and back, old girl," he said softly. "But I have a feeling the worst is yet to come." Suddenly, the radio crackled. A garbled message, urgent and fragmented. Something was stirring deep behind enemy lines, something that could change everything. The details were scarce, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning. Jack's eyes narrowed as he climbed into the cockpit, the familiar embrace of the Jug surrounding him like armor. The engine roared to life, a thunderous heartbeat that echoed his own resolve. As the Thunderbolt taxied down the runway and lifted into the pale dawn, Jack felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The Jug had carried him through firestorms and fury, through laughter and fear. Now it was time for one last mission. One that would either cement its legend or write its final chapter in the skies above a war-torn continent. The horizon stretched wide and uncertain, shadows lengthening as the sun rose. Somewhere out there, a new threat waited, silent, deadly, and relentless. Jack's voice came steady over the radio, a promise and a challenge all in one. "Let's see what you've got." And with that, the Jug surged forward, a juggernaut reborn, racing into the unknown. The war may have been nearing its end, but the story of the Thunderbolt and its pilot was far from over.